Oh, so this is the camera. We're transmitting to YouTube. Okay, so if you are you satisfied with this angle?
Maybe it should be tipped up a little bit like this, huh?
Okay. We were thinking of focusing also on your slides.
Yeah, how can you see all the slides too?
Yeah, we were trying to arrange this before you were ready.
Okay, maybe I better stand on this side. My first YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
My first YouTube lecture. I need to stand on this side.
I think it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that should be okay, shouldn't it? Will that show the slides as well?
Yes.
Okay. If I need a finger, I'll make sure. So, shall we start?
Yeah, please. Do you want me to introduce you?
I can introduce me.
Okay, please.
Boa tarde. No falo português, pouco espanhol, e por eso I understand a bit of Portuguese, but English, of course. I'm Bruce Byers. I'm an ecologist, a writer, and have been an international ecological consultant working around the world in something like more than 40 countries, especially Africa and Latin America. And I'm now on a sort of research trip for writing a new book about John Muir. Was an American, let's see, here. An American conservation hero. He was a scientist, a popular nature writer who stimulated really the system of national parks that we have in the United States. He lived from 1938 to 1914. But this is about what I want to talk about and share with you is John Muir came to Brazil in 1911 looking for your species of Araucaria. And the sketches here, I'll show you some more of them, but these are Muir sketches of the places he visited in Brazil. So yeah, he was born in 1838, died in 1914. He was a scientist, especially of glaciers, and he proved that glaciers during the ice ages carved the landscape of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. First one to prove that. He was he was also a very excellent botanist. And he traveled the world visiting botanical gardens with some of the prominent botanists of the day. For example, the curator of the Harvard Herbarium. And yeah, father of national parks in the United States. I'll say more about him later. The US made a stamp honoring John Muir, and you can see the pictures of the giant trees in the stamp. Muir loved big trees, especially the two giant species of sequoia, the coast redwood, and sequoia-dendron giganteum, the big tree or the giant redwood in the Sierra. He also became a friend, because of his writing and his prominence, of President Theodore Roosevelt, who was president from 1901 to 1909. And Roosevelt was was the first president to really promote public lands conservation, both of national parks, national monuments, and national forests. Our national forest system is partly quite a lot responsible. John Muir in Yosemite, and this is a picture of Roosevelt and Muir. They went off camping together, the President of the United States with Muir. And this is looking down on Yosemite Falls from a viewpoint in the mountains. This is Muir in a place that became Muir Woods National Monument, named or designated by Theodore Roosevelt in 1907. It was an area of old growth coast redwoods just north of San Francisco, which everything else had been cut. It was purchased by a private person, and then the private person said, I'll donate it to the United States if you'll name it after John Muir. So it's Muir Woods National Monument. Perhaps Susanna, who has been in Berkeley for a while, has visited there.
Yeah.
Okay, so why, por qué did John Muir want to come to Brazil in 1911? He was actually inspired by, in his research, travels, and adventures, inspired by Alexander von Humboldt, who was the great German explorer and geographer, who made a trip to South America and Central America in 1799 to 1804. And maybe some of you are familiar with this. Von Humboldt and his companions went down through Colombia after they had been in Brazil, down through Brazil in Venezuela, that's now Venezuela, down through Colombia into Ecuador and climbed nearly to the top of this volcano called Chimborazo. And he noted the vegetational altitudinal bands, the changes in the vegetation. He was also taking all kinds of temperature measurements, physical measurements. So he correlated the vegetation with essentially climate and altitude, elevation. And so he made this really pretty sophisticated for the day diagram of the correlation between vegetation as you went up the mountain, as it got colder and colder. And this was in a book called Plant Geography that he published in 1805. Well, Muir was, in 1911, he was about my age, 73. His wife had died a few years earlier. His daughters were married, and he decided, I'm gonna take off finally and follow Humboldt to South America. So he did. He actually jumped on a ship in New York City, August in 1911, and they sailed south over a couple of weeks to Belém at the mouth of the Amazon. He was a good botanist, so he was curious about Amazonian vegetation, and he went up the Amazon on a steamer, a little riverboat, to Manaus, and then later back to Belém. But he was looking for, in particular, this Victoria amazonica, the giant water lily. Thinking he would climb out there and do a YouTube video or something. But he never found it. They never were able to find it from Manaus. Spent a couple of days going around in boats looking for this. Never found it, but he went back to Belém then. A little sidelight here, he was journaling, taking daily journal the whole trip. It's a little book, a little journal about this big, the kind I use, very small. You can see my hands holding a copy of Muir's journal from the time he was in Chile, and you can see he was sketching and also writing here, notes, sketching as he could fit things in. This is Araucaria or Canna. All of his papers, including his journals, are now in an archive, the John Muir papers at the University of the Pacific in California. And you can go to this website or just Google John Muir papers, and you can get here and you can go to search for his journals by year and look page by page through all of his journals, which are digitized. here. And then there also are transcriptions, so you can actually read what he was saying. Although his handwriting was fairly clear in English, you can read it pretty well, but it's here for every place he went. So using that, we can follow him in Brazil or Chile, for example. He knew that Araucaria, what he called Brasiliensis, angustifolia now, was found here in this region of the Mata Atlântica in southern Brazil and down a little bit into Argentina, I guess in Uruguay. He sort of knew it was here, but he really didn't know how to get there, where he was going. So his journal in 1911 said, the only definite information that I have of the Araucaria brasiliensis, and there's something coming up on the YouTube thing that is blocking the view, but which I was determined to find, was from Professor Banner, who showed me 2 photographs taken somewhere on the upper Uruguay River, in which a few groups of those trees were seen in the general forest of the region. So then, by chance, he's coming from Belém on a ship down to Rio and over to Santos, where he jumps on a train to go through Curitiba. It's not. But he said, sailed for Santos at 5 o'clock this afternoon. Found Mr. Harrell, who introduced me to Mr. Boucher, superintendent of the Paranal Lumber Company, owning nearly 1 million acres of Araucaria forest, which I hope to see. I am cordially invited to travel with Mr. Boucher's party. This will save me a long trip up the Uruguay River, which is true. Then he says, I made the acquaintance of Mr. Harrell, who with a party of 8 or 10 was on his way to work on a large mill that was about completed in the state of Paraná, situated about 300 or 400 miles to the west of Curitiba. I inquired what kind of timber they were going to cut, and they said it was called Brazilian pine, but that he had never seen any of those trees. However, from a description he got from one of the millmen who had been in that work there, they were trees that were perhaps 100 feet high, without limbs, that the limbs were all in a bunch at the top. I had little doubt from this description that they were the trees I was in search of. And then he says, well, he took a train from Sao Paulo, probably through Curitiba to this little place called Porto Amazonas, which is on the upper Iguaçu River. Drizzly morning, Araucarias in hundreds and thousands. Wondrous sight. Seems to bear fire better than other trees. At 11 a.m., still winding among the hills of gentle prairie tableland. Let's see. Fine grassy cattle country. All of the trees picturesque and old, etc. Passed through an extensive forest. Later, the country was one wide prairie with Araucarias only here and there along the streams and crowning hilltops and in detached groves. So perhaps like some of the grassland Araucaria mixes that exist up here, which I hope to see, which I am in search of. They left Porto Amazonas after one night and went down on a riverboat to the junction with the Rio Negro, or where the Rio Negro comes into the Iguaçu, turned upstream and went to Três Barras, which is where that mill was being established. Wasn't even completed in 1911. And then he stayed there almost 2 weeks. This is sort of the route. He came down on a train, probably through Curitiba, over to Porto Amazonas, and then down the Iguaçu overnight and up to Três Barras. And then after a couple of weeks here, whacking around with the lumbermen, they went up to Rio Negro, the town of Rio Negro, and then a train back to Curitiba, and then a train out to Paranaguá, and then by ship down and around. And you'll see the rest of his route in a minute here. So he was out with these lumbermen. They were cutting the trees. They were on these roads out from the mill. he was measuring them, counting the branches, looking at what was growing as a, epiphytes, and he was botanizing with the lumbermen. So in magnificent primeval Araucaria woods, some of the hill slopes of considerable extent have been swept by fire, killing every tree. Here's sketching what he was seeing. And just for fun, I Googled up for some information on that mill. And there's quite a lot of history. There is a little museum in Três Barras, municipal museum, that has a lot of old photos of this, which I went to last week with Marcos Carlucci from University in Curitiba. And anyway, there's lots of information about this. It was massive industrial scale deforestation. But it wasn't really starting in a big way when Muir was there. So he didn't, in his journal when he was there, talk about how horrible this was, which he did in other places in the world where he saw that kind of deforestation. One of the things, though, that, interesting, in Três Barras, we learned at this little museum all about the Contestado War, which started in 1912, was basically a war over Araucaria between this lumber company, sort of, and the Paraná government, and all these settlers and people who were in the forest southward from there. And it went on for 4 years, as you know. So Muir didn't know about that, but it happened right after he was there. I don't know if he could sense, probably not, as he was being hosted by American lumbermen, the social tension. So then, after a couple weeks with the loggers, they went on a riverboat up to the town of Rio Negro, and they saw Araucaria trees all along the river and so forth. And he tried to sketch some of them. Here's a picture of what he was sketching along the river. And this, he says, is the skyline across river from Rio Negro, 2.5 to 3 miles. He's sketching this. So, and then here's another one. These on a far skyline. He says up here, skyline across river from Rio Negro dock, 3 miles. Here at Rio Negro, the young trees growing on the river bottom are the finest I have so far seen. A row of Araucaria crowning the top of a ridge about 3 miles distant make a striking effect. 6 p.m., no sign of the train. He was going back to Curitiba. No sign of the train. Train came at last. We left Rio Negro at 7:30 and arrived at Curitiba at 2:30 on the morning of the 26th. The Araucaria distributed as far as I could make out in the starlight most of the way. Had a miserable night on the cars. Went to a hotel, had 3 or 4 hours of sleep, walked about town after a late breakfast. So he's kind of saying how he feels and stuff, but it's not really detailed about how I'm feeling. His sketches, though, are what we can use to try to, as a time lapse, ecological time lapse, you might say, to try to see. I put this in my presentation, sorry, is dated. It was prepared before last week when I went into the field with Marcos Carlucci and a couple of students. So we were going to go, and what I said then is, what do the woods around Três Barras look like now? What is the view now across the river from the dock of Rio Negro? So we went there using these sketches of Muir's. So I have another one. We go into Rio Negro, big town, houses going down on each side of the river, a bridge, a big cement bridge crossing in the middle of town. And we go down there and it's like, whoa, this doesn't look like this. But we go to the little municipal museum and walk in, and somehow somebody calls over an older woman who had lived there her whole life. She's my age also. And she looks at these sketches and she goes, oh yeah. She takes us around, walks through the town with us, telling us all about the history of the town. There's a bridge that was there, an iron bridge across the Rio Negro. That was there when Muir went. Muir doesn't even mention it. The dock is now gone. There are no boats coming here, but she knew that the dock was right down below that bridge. She looks at these sketches and she knew that one sketch, this one, was made from the other side of the river, up a hill by the cemetery. And then this one was made from the old dock. So we went to these places and took pictures of what it looks like now. And the weird thing is, you know, now you can look down a main street that crosses a cement bridge and mostly houses and everything, but there's like one or two Araucaria standing on the skyline. Whether those are the same ones 100 and something years ago, maybe not, but really interesting to try to follow these footsteps and see the ecological and economic changes. Okay, now I want to jump, check my time here. After Muir was in, let's see. So he went from essentially Curitiba over to Paranaguá, caught a boat, and in a couple of days went down the coast. And they stopped in Florianópolis, Floripa, and on down the coast, and then went to eventually Montevideo in Uruguay, and then he went across to Buenos Aires. He was then in quest of Araucaria Araucana in Chile. So here he says on the 9th of November, start for Santiago at 8:30 a.m. And by that night, they could see the foothills of the Andes. No, the next day, so it was overnight. The 10th of November, they could see the foothills. And they changed cars at Mendoza, went up and over the Andes, stopped for the night in Los Andes, which is still a town above Santiago, and then arrived at Santiago at 10:30 in the morning. This is the old and current railway station in Santiago. So starting in 2012, with my son, who happened to be working in Chile a bit as an ecotourism guide, we decided we would try to follow Muir's footsteps in Chile. So in Santiago, I went to the old railway station and the Botanic Garden and the museum and things where Muir went. From his journal, he says, on the strength of my credentials from President Taft, he was a famous person, I was cordially received by Mr. Fletcher, Minister Plenipotentiary from the U.S., who directed his auto driver, who speaks English, to get my baggage from the hotel and take me to the botanical gardens to search for information concerning Araucaria imbricata. So he was using another species, Araucaria araucana. Now, the director of the gardens took pains to give me a general description of its distribution so far as known. He also presented me with a fine photograph of old trees, which he said must have come from somewhere near Concepcion, but he had never seen any of the trees of this species growing naturally, and of course could give me no definite information on how to reach them. So just like coming into Brazil, Muir was going blind. It's like, I'm looking for Araucaria. And by happenstance again, they give him a picture, one single photograph of these trees. I photographed this old photograph at the John Muir National Historic Site, which is in Martinez, California, not far from Berkeley and Oakland, and not far from San Francisco. And he presented me with a fine photograph of old trees, but he had never seen any of the trees of this species growing naturally. On the back of that photograph, which I photographed here too, it says Araucarias of Vulk-Tolwaka, capital V-U-L-K. Vulkan in German is volcano, so it's Vulkan-Tolwaka. Capital V would be the German, for a proper noun. Turns out that there was a very famous, the equivalent of John Muir in Chile was a guy named Federico Albert, who was a German immigrant to Chile, a scientist. He was gone at that point. He never met John Muir, but this is his handwriting. We did handwriting analysis and we figured it out. So Muir saw Vulk-Tolwaka. He shows this to people and they go, yeah, oh yeah, Vulkan-Tolwaka. 600 kilometers south, down the Central Valley, up into the Andes. So the next day, Muir jumps on a train and goes to this little town called Victoria in Chile. And he meets up with another Canadian in this case, guy associated with the lumber industry who was selling steam-powered sawmills for cutting the forest, the lower elevation forests around this town of Victoria. Meeting up with him, the guy says, I know how to take you into the mountains where you're looking at these trees. So they take him out to their ranch, way out towards the edge of the Andes. And this is what Muir sketched on November 19th. He sketches these couple of volcanoes. This is Tolwaka, and this is Volcan Lonquimay. And from this ranch, Fondo Ontario, that was owned by this Canadian lumbering guy. When we went there then in March of 2013, we found our way out to where you could see almost exactly the same scene. So this is what it looks like now. This is what Muir sketched. Really pretty accurate sketching, I think. In his journal the next day, they're taking him to the mountains. Foggy morning, 6 o'clock, packing for the lofty ridges where it grows Araucaria, imbricata. After crossing many hilly ridges and streams, came in full sight of a ridge 1,000 feet high, the top of which was fringed with the long sought for Araucaria. Long scramble up the steep grassy slope and brush. One horse fell and rolled. So when my son and I finally got to the right place, just south of Volcan Tolwaka, we could look up and see this ridge. And we thought, that must be it. So we go bashing our way up through this kind of vining bamboo, kilya, we call it there. And we go up there and we get to the top of the ridge. Muir wrote, trace the ridge a mile or two admiring, which we did too. It was these beautiful views over the volcanoes in the Andes with these native Araucaria auricana. And then descended long slope to meadow by the side of a brawling, bouldery stream and encamped beneath an Araucaria grove. So we also went around and found what we think is the very place where Muir camped with these hosts who were taking him to the mountains. Araucaria in scattered groups or singly, all the way up and down south slope and fringing the horizon all around. A glorious and novel sight beyond all I had hoped for. So he sketched this glorious and novel sight, the Araucarias on the ridge, big tall ones in between. It's very, very open. Yeah. So we went there and yeah, this is, he was sketching some things. We went there and the second trip, I think, went with a park ranger from the Chilean National Park Service from Volcan Tolwaka. Here we don't see it. Something's changed. It wasn't cities built up in this case. It was, this is Muir's sketch. And in trying to find what might be these giant old trees, we went up on the hillside above so we could see above the young forest. And we found these big, giant emergent trees out in the middle of a young Araucaria forest. But from where he sketched, yeah, those there, from where he sketched, this is pretty much what it looked like. Young forest, mixed age stand of just exuberant young Araucaria coming up all over the place. And on the ground, it was almost like grass reproduction of so thick of these things. So we decided, okay, well, if this was where he was sketching, how old are these trees that weren't there when Muir was there in 1911? This is my son coring a young Araucaria that was in the foreground, maybe this big. Counting the rings, turned out to be about 100 years old. So pretty much perfect. That tree was one of those little grassy things, perhaps, when Muir was there. So there was another place, this is a Muir sketch, of a single tall tree looking 90 degrees from that other sketch. This is what that looks like now with this cluster of young, maybe 100-year-old Araucaria araucana in the foreground. In 2016, we took a group of national park folks, Chilean academic forest researchers, and so on, up to this Muir site, talking about how we might conserve it, actually. And so this is a picture of probably that same tall tree that Muir sketched. Jumping a little bit here, Araucaria araucana is mostly found in the Andes, mostly in Chile, but also in Argentina, but also their populations over in the coast range of Chile, which is quite a different, more moist environment. Some giant ones in a national park called Nova Zelândia. So these are some pictures of fire scars on big old Araucaria in that national park. Very fire resistant bark, it appears, which also Araucaria angustifolia appears to have. Okay, let's see. Let me go back. In a minute or in a while, if we have time, I'll talk a little about some fire ecology stuff too related to Araucaria. But in the meantime, I thought I'd give you a little more background on Muir and why he's a conservation hero. He was born in Dunbar, Scotland in 1838. He was 11 years old. His family emigrated to the United States and moved way out to the frontier in the state of Wisconsin, Midwest, land which had just basically been taken from the Indians. There was an Indian war 10 years before their family went and settled the land, and they chased the Native Americans off. But he lived there until he went to college at the University of Wisconsin. This is a picture of him as a student at the University of Wisconsin. He, in 1864, which was during the American Civil War, he was afraid he was going to be drafted into the military. So he went to Canada, which his brother had also done, and he worked in a sawmill in Canada. It's kind of he would never seem to be far from loggers and timber sawers, even though he was a conservationist. He returned to the U.S. in 1866. He worked in a wagon wheel making factory in Indiana, but he injured his eye really badly and took a while to recuperate. And as soon as his eye was better and he could see, 1867, he took off walking from Indiana 1,000 miles toward Florida, where he was going to catch a boat to follow Alexander von Humboldt to go to South America, maybe Venezuela, maybe the same thing. As he was walking, he got down to Georgia, or one of our southern states, and got malaria, which was common then. And he was laid up sick, almost died, recuperated in Florida for a few months, and then someone told him, you better go to a healthy climate and get your health back, and then you can go follow Humboldt. So he took a ship for California, around Cape Horn, up to San Francisco. Pretty much as soon as he got to San Francisco, within a week, he started walking for the mountains to the east, to the Sierra Nevada, to Yosemite Valley, to this big glacial carved valley that's now one of our most visited national parks. And then it had some tourism, but it also had sheep grazing and timber cutting going on there. So he went there and fell in love with the Sierra. One of his friends was the Scotsman William Keith, who was a landscape painter of about the same era. And Muir and Keith became close in terms of trying to promote conservation of Yosemite. This was when he was sorry. My bottle's blocking the projector. This is about the time he was going into the Sierra every summer and spending the summers in the Sierra and starting to write and do research. He also was sketching. Here's a picture of a mountain that has a big glacier now, and he went up and put stakes across the ice to show that it was moving, like flowing like a river, and basically proved that those were glaciers. And then he saw that maybe the glaciers have carved these features. This is a place called Cathedral Peak that I revisited and tried to re-photograph. He also fell in love with this is now Sequoia-dendron giganteum, the giant sequoia, or the big tree. And this is one of his sketches. It says 250 feet high, 15 feet in diameter. This is a picture for scale of some of those giant sequoias in the Sierra. And they're scattered in various groves, which Muir mapped and published a scientific paper in 1876 with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which now publishes the journal Science, which is pretty prestigious. So he was a scientist. In 1880, he married, but he kept exploring the Sierra. He kept writing articles for popular magazines, and one of those basically inspired Congress to create Yellowstone National Park. Yosemite National Park. Yellowstone had been created in 1872, but Yosemite was not a park when we first started going there. But he worked to help protect that. And then he also helped to found something called the Sierra Club, which is a very large, influential private conservation organization, mostly focused on California in the early days, but now focused really globally. Okay, maybe I should stop before I leap into another short section. Anybody have any? If I've been going too fast or anything like that, well, we can have questions at the end. But anyway, okay, well, before he went to Brazil and Chile when he was 73, in 1904, he had traveled around the world with this botanist from the Harvard Herbarium. And he went to New Zealand to see the kauri tree, Gathus australis, but you have one right out here that Susanna showed me, which is the first time I've ever seen a kauri. I'm gonna try to go to New Zealand next year. It's only the northern part of New Zealand up here where the kauri live, and he made a beeline for the kauri country of New Zealand because Darwin had been there. And Darwin had described this. So Muir was also a follower of famous adventuring, exploring scientists. And I know he wanted to do that himself too. So this is the Cowrie. The Cowrie supposedly has the second largest wood volume, amount of wood in the tree, of any species of tree in the world. And the first biggest wood volume is the giant sequoia. So Muir loved big, old trees. He went to Queensland in Australia on his way back from New Zealand, just across, eastern Australia, to see Araucaria bidwillii, the bunya pine, and Araucaria cunninghamii, the hoop pine, and saw them both. Now this is a leap. He came back from his round the world trip and his whole family had a bunch of respiratory diseases the winter of 1904, 1905. His wife ended up never recovering and died in August. And his daughter, one of his daughters, was diagnosed with tuberculosis. So in 1905, his wife died, and he moved with his two daughters to a little hotel on the Union Pacific Railroad in a place called the Petrified Forest. It wasn't a national park or monument then, but it was full of these big old trees, which Muir loved. And it was very dry climate, supposedly good for tuberculosis. His daughter did recuperate and live a long life, but they spent almost a year there exploring. This is one picture of big chunks of fossil wood lying on the hillsides. And here's a historic photo of Muir looking at one of those trees. This is another one, just sort of for fun. Muir and his daughters and a couple of other guys examining a chunk of fossil wood. So I tried to reenact this with my daughter a few years ago. Exact same chunk of wood. Hadn't moved much, maybe a few inches. He, being a good botanist, after he was in the Petrified Forest, he got a hold of an old book from the late 1800s called Fossil Botany that talked about the paleobotany of all kinds of plants. But one of them that he noted in the back, and I took this picture at the John Muir Library in California. They let me look at this old book, and in the back he had, notes like some of us make in margins and in the back. And he was noting that there was a page on Araucaria on page 57. So this is that page in that book. And he knew then he was suspicious. In fact, another botanist at the Smithsonian had already decided that a piece of wood hauled back to the Smithsonian, he called it Araucaria oxylon, in ancient Araucaria. So Muir had this also idea that Araucaria, which he had seen in at least New Zealand and Australia, had also been found in North America. This is just a map of Pangea at 210 million years ago, the late Triassic. And so the petrified forest in North America is somewhere up in here. And Brazil, I can't really see it very well from here, but it's down in here somewhere. I think, no, down in here. Here's South America. So we're about here. Petrified forest is here. Australia and New Zealand over here. Muir, I think he must have had an idea like, what's going on here? Araucarias are found in part of what used to be hooked up with the petrified forest. And now I'm hoping in a week or so to go to your Triassic fossil belt in Santa Maria, in Mata, Jardín Paleobotânico, and see if I can see some of the same fossil Araucarias or fossil trees there. Now I'm going to leap to one other little bit just for fun, and then maybe if we decide there's time, something about fossil fire stars. How many of you know about the Mata Atlantica UNESCO Biosphere Reserve? Yeah, okay.
Just very superficially.
Okay. Well, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization has this program called Man in the Biosphere, of course, humans in the biosphere, but it was created in 1971 or 72. And what it is, it's supposed to be special sites around the world that have core areas of extremely protected biodiversity. And then zones, they have this zonal description. Okay, around this biodiversity, how are people using it and conserving it? And how can we protect that and still support human societies as we move outward? So this is a little map that I got from the internet of the southern part of the Mata Atlantica Biosphere Reserve, which is one of their many. There are 180 something biosphere reserves in the world now. And I don't know how many in Brazil. Anyway, here's some Floripa, Curitiba, and not far away in your national parks, which I'm hoping to go to in the next week, is the core zones, of protected area. But the green is sort of buffer zones, human uses and hopefully economic benefits, but surrounding strict or core protection. And then orange areas that are even more human disturbed, I guess you'd say, or focused on human activities, but hopefully with cooperation to protect the core areas. So from either tourism that's somewhere outside, and I don't know where Floripa would fall here. This has been one of my a strong interest for me during a fairly long ecological consulting career, international ecological consulting career, with the U.S. Agency for International Development, the World Bank, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and so on. How can we have balance or create a healthy balance between humans and nature? So this biosphere reserve model is one that's been very important to me, and I've looked at something like 36 biosphere reserves around the world, but I thought I would focus in on some of our own in the US. There are 28 of them, I think, and there are 3 on the US Pacific coast, which is a place that I know and love. So I wrote a book, did research and finished a book about the Cascade Head Biosphere Reserve on the Oregon coast. It was published in 2020, that's this one, by Oregon State University Press, and then decided, well, that was fun, so I'll go to California, and there are 2 biosphere reserves on the coast there. One is gigantic, called the Golden Gate Biosphere Reserve, centered on San Francisco, but it includes an immense ocean area that's part of 2 national marine sanctuaries that are run by NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. My friend Susan worked for NOAA for a while.
And everyone gets it wrong.
Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But it also includes Muir Woods as a core protected area. It includes Point Reyes National Seashore, and it includes the Pepperwood Preserve, which is a private reserve that Susanna has visited. I've seen pictures of her there. This book has, and also the Channel Islands, which are just off of Santa Barbara in Southern California, a really unique place that some people call the California's Galapagos, because the islands have created endemic species, have been inhabited by people for something like 13,000 years. Until a few thousand years ago, there was a pygmy mammoth that rambled around on the island, about the size of a donkey. Anyway, this is that book, and I'm gonna give Susanna a copy and let her decide how she might want to share it. Check it out from the library or something. Okay, so I could quit here, or might have 10 minutes about fossil fire scars. Fossil fire scars? Okay,
I agree. Awesome.
how many of you have seen fire scars on living trees, normal trees? Yes, okay, most, some. You know, I don't know, a very, very moist forest, whether you'd have enough fires to create fire scars, but this is one from on lodgepole pine, Pinus contorta in Colorado, in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. You can see how the fire burning upslope, the hot part was on the uphill side, and it killed the cambium here and reached up a certain distance before it cooled off. So you get this almost like flame-shaped dead patch. It didn't kill the whole tree. It wasn't hot enough to kill the whole tree. And the tree starts growing wound wood to heal that scar. With my son, we went to the Petrified Forest National Park. No one had ever looked for fossil fire scars on the trees in the Petrified Forest because they were paleo something, some botanists or whatever. They weren't ecologists of the modern day, so they didn't even know what a fire scar looked like. You know? So I reached out to them and said, "No, sure, come and look for them." So we did, and this is one very parallel one that we found up here. Some sort of flame. Looking at it, looking at one of those chunks, you can see the size of it and the wound wood, the healing wood growing around the face of the scar. Here's that piece cut, so you can kind of see the wound wood, the scarred area here. And this would be a modern equivalent. Here's the wound wood, and the scarred area has a distinctive color. I started working with several people, including a paleobotanist from the Petrified Forest, but also a woman in Spain who is a wood anatomy climatologist or ecologist or something. She looks at the growth of Mediterranean trees and can read back the climate, the dates of droughts, all of that stuff. By looking at the size of the tracheids, the cells in the wood. The wood in the Petrified Forest in that particular area is per-mineralized. It's not completely replaced by minerals, partially replaced, and it leaves the cell structure. So this is a slice and a photomicrograph of that fossil fire scarred tree, and you can see the size of the tracheids. She measured them across the scar tissue of the fossil tree, 210 million years old, and sure enough, it matches perfectly almost the pattern of cell size in a modern fire scar. We could see a drought coming along as the cells of the tree got smaller, then the scar, which disrupted the growth for a couple of years. Then, because fires usually release a bunch of nutrients, often the trees grow faster for a few years after. So we could see the cell size get bigger. So the one paper was the first known fire scar on a fossil tree, showing evidence of late Triassic wildfire. This is the Spanish wood anatomist. And then this one is the one where we were able to measure the drought signal by her wood anatomy. It was in Nature Scientific Reports. And that's it. So anyway, thank you very much for your attention and maybe questions. I'm really happy to be able to be here and share this with you. Thanks to Susanna, who jumped at the chance to organize this, which is very kind. And I've been corresponding already with Eduardo and Rafael and Sophia. I don't know if she made it. She did. Okay. Anyway, question in the back.
That's the only petrified forest in the world? The only petrified forest in the world?
No, you have your one in southern Brazil. The Santa Maria Mata in the...
I guess it's the bigger petrified forest in the world. The biggest.
Okay, so yeah, in terms of extent, yeah, or exposure. There also is another really interesting one that I was almost tempted to visit on this trip, but it would have been a whole other thing. In Patagonia, somewhere down in Argentina, is a maybe Miocene, I guess, aged fossil forest in a dry region that looks quite similar to the petrified forest in the US. And there they supposedly have fossilized Araucaria cones, leaves, maybe even bark. The thing about the petrified forest in the US, there are no fossilized leaves, bark, or cones. So it's kind of a guess by the wood anatomy of the fossil tree that it's an Araucaria, that it's that type of a tree, an ancient conifer. But again, I'm betting, and I do hope to visit Mata with a paleobotanist from Santa Maria. Maybe we're going to find the first fossil fire scar described in Brazil. But I think if you went around in Argentina in that fossil forest, you probably could find the first fossil fire scar described in Argentina too. And an interesting thing too, I'm showing these slides to these folks studying Araucaria from University Federal de Paraná, and they're going like, we don't really have many fires here because it's too moist. And although Muir described seeing them burned, but that was near a logging camp. But the adaptations, some of them fit perfectly with the kind of adaptations you would expect for fire tolerance. Thick bark, branch shedding, not serotinous cones is one type of a fire adaptation, but some fire adaptations, perhaps it would be an idea of somehow maybe the Araucariaceae conserved certain fire adaptations, through their history. Another interesting thing too is you see pictures of dinosaurs grazing in Araucaria forests, and we thought of this in Chile. Araucaria araucana has the fiercest branches. You would have to have a steel mouth to eat that stuff. And also you'd have to be really tall to reach them with the branch head. So whether it's fire, whether it's grazing.
One very interesting thing about this, and very coincident, is that Araucariaceae is one of the only families of conifers that are able to resprout after some damage. So we had a catastrophic fire in the park that we will visit tomorrow, and we had the chance to take a look at Araucaria seedlings that were affected by this fire we thought that they were all dead because of this huge fire that almost 10 meters high that burned also the canopy, and small seedlings like this were resprouting from the base. So this is another evidence that Araucaria has something with fire, and coincidentally or not, 2 weeks ago we got a paper accepted in fire ecology where we show this and we talk about all these features that Araucaria industrifolia has that are prone to sustain fire, to do not be killed by fire. Thick bark, the branch abscission, this resprouting capacity, and
I
that's
thought I
great
had,
to see that you also have this idea.
yeah, well, we'll definitely have to pursue that as we talk. I thought I had seen coast redwood resprouting.
So
Coast redwood in California resprouting, I'm not sure. The sequoia dendron, the big tree in California, is really fire adapted. It's a much drier climate, and but anyway, really interesting. It would be interesting to put you all in touch with the Chilean forest ecologists that I worked with on the Chile project, because they wanted to go. We saw on some of those big trees that I showed you that would have been there when Muir was. Some of those have fire scars.
the branch abscission thing that Araucaria has for me is one of the most interesting features, because Araucaria doesn't lose leaves, but it's a big branch from the top that allows it to manipulate fire somehow, to keep fire on the ground, not on the not on the ground.
Really interesting to me. See, the other reason that I'm so glad to have a chance to talk with people who know things, I learn about parrots and fire ecology. And what else? Yeah.
I have a question. I forgot my glasses, so I couldn't see perfectly the sketches, but it seems to me that most of the sketches shows scattered trees, not in the forest. And we know that the Araucaria is a very important element of the forests. So we see the emergent trees. Is there any sketches or any comments of viewers that shows this? Or
Let me see if I can go back to his sketches from Chile, at least. Not from here, from Brazil. You saw that he had pictures of trees of all different sizes and shapes. Let's see.
because it's very impressive from the landscape. You see the forest from afar, and you see the emergent Araucarias.
Yeah, actually, so these are Muir sketch, and you can see that most of those are crowned already. Some maybe much taller and older. I think he might have one here.
But there seems to be a forest underneath,
Yes.
like other species
Yeah.
underneath
A lot of
the other one.
Yeah.
Not this one.
this.
I think I have. Yeah, you're right. Okay, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Chile, what was coming up under those there had probably been a fire before Muir got there in 1911 that wiped out the understory.
Mhm.
What was coming up when we were there, and there might have been another fire since then, was Araucaria and a couple of species of Nothofagus. But there also was in another part kind of an understory or competing Nothofagus that might have been suppressing the Araucaria resprouting. So these Chilean foresters wanted to go in and do a dendrochronology study of ages of the different species of trees and what was happening with the forest dynamics there.
Something else that we see here is that we don't have that many seedlings and saplings growing underneath this closed forest, but sometimes even more saplings outside the forest. So, yeah,
Yeah, and that's,
we decided that Araucaria actually is probably going to be favored by disturbances like fire
yeah,
or something like
could
that. And then
possibly,
it matches a lot like what you're saying, like these big events can
the
help it
dynamics of the
to,
succession.
yeah,
Reduce the competition.
Mm.
Fire and kill the other trees.
And-
tropical trees are there with fire, but the Araucaria is there and open spaces, so we can.
and it is seen as a pioneer species,
Mhm.
long-lived pioneer.
Yeah, and someone was telling me, yeah, which Marcos also told me about the potential that humans were spreading over here because of the food value.
Mm.
You know, it was like the California Native Americans did that with oaks, a number of species of oak, which they harvested as food.
John Muir didn't wrote anything about the indigenous peoples that used to manage Araucaria,
See,
both in Chile or in southern Brazil.
he,
They were alienated at that time.
he didn't. I think that in reading his journals, we think that he described the two guys who went with them. There was only a party of 5. Muir and a Canadian lumberman, a Canadian sawmill seller, and an American lumberman. And he said 2 Chilean packers, horse packers. The Mapuche were noted horsemen, and I think those packers were Mapuche. Muir never used that word, never said anything about indigenous, never said anything else. Whether he knew or understood, I don't know. My son and I went back there. This would have been the second trip. We went and found the old fundo, the old farmhouse, where Muir slept overnight before he went to the mountains. That's where those pictures of the volcanoes were taken. To see the place where those pictures of the volcanoes were taken, we showed up at this place, and this whole group of Mapuche come out and stop us. They bring out their kind of leader, their spokesperson, was wearing a U.S. T-shirt of some sort. But really nice guy, and he talked to us for a long time, and he took us and showed us that view of the volcanoes from near that farmhouse. The Chilean government is repatriating some lands, and that fundo where Muir went is one of those lands being given back to Mapuche. So it's really interesting too. Muir didn't say anything about that or the Contestado War, or he was kind of oblivious to it, I think. In North America, he donated money to a sort of NGO, nonprofit, that was advocating for Native American land rights. So he had a view that Native Americans should own some of this land. He was donating money. One of his friends was the leader of that organization.
Thank you so much. That's very interesting.
Thank you all for coming, and good luck with all of your good work.